So, welcome again to this course on cognition, emotion and transformation. We are almost midway through, and I hope you have got some broad idea in the last four, 5 lectures on how the growth of self happens, how the cognition develops, how the emotions interplay with it, and how is the self placed in the world. Now, the whole background and the need for it was to bring our minds to a point where we start thinking about one very important word called change. Change is happening all the time around us, and we keep adjusting to it, and sometimes we make others and other things adjust to us in the process of assimilation and accommodation. But is change voluntary or involuntary? That is the crux of this course, and we will be talking about it in the later lectures. Just to take a small detour and just to place the whole thing in perspective and try to understand that what is this need for change. There are other lot of needs, but let us take one or two examples. The biggest need of change comes when you people think that they are not behaving normally. And what is this definition of normal? Society has evolved various mechanisms of defining this normal vis-a-vis not so normal or abnormal. But these are the things when these are most commonest thing when people are even a child, as we talk, that a child often looks upon the parents and the parents keep teaching the child on how to behave appropriately. So, this appropriate behavior when it does not happen, not on a one off basis or a sporadic incident, but largely on a slightly prolonged for a prolonged period when people are not behaving in a certain way which is expected by the society or by themselves, then the conflict starts, and that is the biggest trigger of change. And people are often asked to change, and at a larger level we have already talked how it happens. And that is how the whole profession of mental health professionals in psychiatry has evolved. So, let us look at this whole concept of as an example to what we were talking about, how cognition and emotions interplay, about this issue of what is normal and what is abnormal. You know this picture, very famous drawing, and all of us know what is the context of this. The context is, this is Arjun who has suddenly developed some feeling of renunciation in during this epic battle of Mahabharata, and here is Lord Krishna himself who is teaching him, or rather answering his questions on issues of life, which was later compiled and called as Bhagavad Gita. Behind this is, if you see this is what we call a Virat Roop or Vishwaroop of Krishna, which Krishna finally showed to Arjun to tell him that all dynamics of the world is within him. Now, it may be a mythology, but it points out to a very, very important question, that obviously there are certain ways by which you should move in life. So, was Arjun exhibiting some madness at that time? What is called madness? In Hindi we call it a word called pagal. These were the words which were being used for very long, insane. We will talk about it as we go on. So, Socrates, when he was, so what do you call madness? It is a madness. Is it a mental illness, or is it just one mode of a different type of methodology which is going on in the mind? Socrates had this interesting thing to say. He said, madness, it comes as a gift of the heaven, is the channel by which we receive the greatest blessing. So, according to the evidence provided by our ancestors, madness is a nobler thing than a sober sense. Madness comes from God, whereas sober sense is merely human. He was pointing out that what we do and what we think is actually the way we do it is a creation of human, while those people who develop certain amount of disbalance or not behaving in the protocol of the society in which they are living, they may be having a gift from the God. Khalil Gibran also had almost similar thing to say. I have found both freedom and safety in my madness, the freedom of loneliness and the safety from being understood. For those who understand us, enslave something in us. John Nash, we all know, he recently died in an accident. He had an illness called paranoid schizophrenia, and he still went on to win a Nobel Prize. And I think this is a, most of you would have seen this film called One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest. If not, see it. It actually poses a very important question of an individual versus the formed laws and protocols of the society. John Nash was once called to the World Psychiatry Association meet. I think it was in Madrid, and he thanked the doctors for they could cure him. But he also said, please don't take away my creativity, because obviously he related his creativity to the abnormal phases of mind in which he was working. And you know this man, one of the most beautiful actors, Robin Williams, who committed suicide in, I think, 1 or 2 years back. The type of roles which he has done, whether you look at Patch Adams or Dead Poets Society, or you look at Good Will Hunting, or a film called Hook by Steven Spielberg, entirely very intense emotional roles. And obviously he was an actor. So if you remember, we have talked about the Rasa theory in the last lecture, and how actors can control their expression of emotion through cognition. But when you watch these films, for some time your cognition and your thought actually is off, and you intensely emote yourself, even to the extent of crying or laughing with this character, and such a person committed suicide. So the big question is, which people have to answer, the mental health professional, what are they treating? Are they treating a patient or a person? So what is abnormal? There have been various words, like in Hindi, as I said, a common word was pagal, and that is still a taboo, because a lot of people who go to a mental health professional will say, see, I am not a pagal. The other terms in other languages were insane, lunatic, and that is how lunatic was linked to the, some people discovered that with the lunar cycle, the people exhibit abnormal behavior. And then you all would have heard a term called lunatic asylum, it is no more used. Initially, these people who had abnormal behavior were also treated as criminals, almost clubbed, but that is centuries back. Mad is another common term which is being used. But now all this terminology, with a lot of deliberation and human rights movements, and with the development of understanding of brain, people have realized that all these people are not so. So society has evolved two mechanisms. One, for people who are behaving abnormally with intent are criminals, and those who broadly, I mean, it is not the definition, and those who do not have an intent and perform some act which is against it are mentally ill. So the criminals are dealt with justice system, this is dealt with psychiatry. We do not know the future terminology. A case in example would be somebody like the kids who have during developments, their intelligence grows slowly, IQ test, which is the most common thing, and kids who have developmental problems were also clubbed with all this, but later on then they were called handicapped, disabled, and now they are called different special children, and then differentially abled. This is how the terminology changes with as we gain knowledge. We gain knowledge individually as well as society, and that brings in a transformation in our thinking. So, old terminology is washed out, it does not change, it is transformed. Our knowledge is transformed to some other level where we understand why is the person behaving, and that is how the law also looks at it. So, what differentiates a criminal from mentally ill is probably intent. A criminal is supposed to have committed some act which is against the rules of society, knowing fully well the implications of it and has an intent to do it. Whereas, intent is not present in a person who has mental illness, because obviously he is not aware or lack of insight. It is not always the case, but largely that is a broader differentiation. So, the big question is that if being not so normal or abnormal is the impetus to change, whether with the help of psychiatry or with the help of religion or with the help of self-help guru or whatever. But this behavior is posited against what is normal, and all of us actually, if you look at it in the trajectory of your life, there would have been a lot of points where we would have tried to change ourselves because of this. Like it is written, smoking not allowed at some place, and you smoke. So, one way of it could be rebel, and one way of it could be not so normal behavior, or somebody may point out, and then so all these ads which come for anti-smoking or anti-drinking or trying to change the behavior which society tries to change is actually pinpointing something deep within by which. So, the big question is, but there are people who rebel. So, what is normal? IQ, as I said. So, within this Gaussian curve, most of the population will fall in their IQs. So, when you talk of normal, as mental health defines it, WHO defines it, is not just the absence of mental disorder. So, that means you do not have to be mentally ill. If you are not mentally ill, you are mentally healthy, is no correlation. Unless you have a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. This is a more or less comprehensive definition, but very difficult to fulfill if you look at it. Everybody has some gap somewhere in the cognitive process or in the emotional handling. So, we have people who develop problems and the illnesses which can happen at a level of cognition or can happen at the level of emotion, emotional regulation, lot of mood disorders, the mood symptoms in impulse illness called impulse discontrol or borderline personality. You do not have to go into the detail, I am just, or in obsessive compulsive disorder where there is a problem of in the thought, or schizophrenia where people develop delusion which is a content of thought. So, or both can coexist. There is a very common illness which is happening to old people these days is dementia, all of you know about it, where this cognitive capacities decline. In the most layperson term, as the brain shrinks, there is certain damage to tissues in certain area which are responsible. You remember the words I use, frontal cortex and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. The ability to abstract, the ability to judge correctly, the ability to problem solve, the ability to they slowly start getting diminished. The capacity diminishes with the brain shrinking, with the memory shrinks. So, that is a illness of cognition, but it associated with it could be a problem of emotion. So, if we look at the extremes of the problems of either cognition or emotion, in between there is a whole range, and everybody has experienced, even if temporarily, all such things. How anxiety, we talked about anxiety, how anxiety can actually block your mind. So, this comprises a broad range of problems. However, they are generally characterized by some combination of abnormal thoughts, emotions, behavior and relationship with others. this, the alteration in this actually helps us decide whether it is abnormal or not. When I am saying abnormal, the way abnormal is defined is in this era in which we are living and in this context of our culture. Maybe some other day, some other time, this may not be considered as abnormal. So, the big question is whether the abnormal illness is on a continuum, that we all have normal people who are healthily adjusted. Or suppose you are exposed to a stress, say a grief reaction or sudden change of job or relationship, everybody has an adjustment reaction. This adjustment reaction can be brief or prolonged, and if some people may just cross this threshold and have a minor illness. Depression is a very common term which is being used right from United Nations to national level, and it is being considered as number one killer, even surpassing cardiac, and the Indian Prime Minister also talked about the whole thing in one of his interactions with the people, that depression is something which should be talked about and it should be handled, because it is a, even if it does not kill on its own, the underlying current of depression complicates your illnesses and your life, or so, and then to a major illness, whether it is a continuous illness and people lie on this continuum from 0 to 100, because this would include lot of transitory abnormal behavior, the rebellious behavior of children, at times the behavior of children of going out and trying alcohol or smoking, or people falling in relationships, getting out of relationship, unstable relationship, lot of it would fall into on this continuum. That means everybody is alike, and people who are abnormal are not actually abnormal. There is a possibility that there is maybe a small percentage at this end which may have a illness, and at this end who may not be functioning normally intellectually, or when I am talking of mental retardation and all, but largely most people fall between this. That is one of the way of looking at it. The other way is that normal people, it is discrete. There are people who are normal and there are people who are abnormal. Now, this abnormal can be criminal or mentally ill. Again, as I said, justice system and psychiatry, and these are normal people who have minor problems of adjustment, as the WHO definition says, and have now and then, but they are largely able to carry on their relationships well. But who is 100% normal? Is there somebody? If you look deeply, people will be having problems, and we know people have problems. Actually, if you go to a psychiatric clinic or to a cardiac clinic or to a neurology clinic, lot of people are apparently normal. They do not have actual 30% people who have anxiety and worry and all. So, is that worry or even too much worry or too much anxiety, is that all normal? We assume that is normal. What is appearing is that there may be a threshold beyond which this can turn into illness, both in time and space. So, this, although we have a system of diagnosis which is discrete, but what we see is there is a whole continuum of, so because we do not know the causes, that is why we look at the whole thing in a sense of normal, abnormal. But who is ill actually? Was this man ill? Because when the whole England was in overcoats and coat, he was walking with one shawl and this dress and went on to meet. We will talk about Gandhi later. So, is mental health defined by a unitary construct? Is it one definition that water is made of H2O? It is not like that. Even water has hydrogen and oxygen. So, or we define mental health by context. If you go to some tribes in Africa or some Adivasis deep in India, look at them. The way they are living would be entirely different from the way somebody is living in Mumbai or New York. But would we call them mentally ill? just because they do not follow our pattern, just because they do not look at the whole thing in the way we look at it. So, is context important? Because in the context, now somebody who says I am sad because of a relationship, say a marital relationship, and oh, the person may be having depression, but just treating depression, would it sort out? Would it sort out the problem, relationship problem? Somebody, a student who is finding difficulty in studying a subject and is unable to express this to his or her mentor and performs academically bad, and after a few semesters lands up in depression. So, we treat the depression. When it comes to us, we treat the depression as illness and then say fine, you are fine, you go back. But does it sort out the problem? Because we have not addressed the context. So, this whole sorting out of the underlying context is something which you should remember as we go and talk about what is the need for what I said, transformation. One of the need arises from this, because whatever. So, what are the facts? Everyone has a unique blueprint of personality, which is conditioned by nurture. We already know you are born with a temperament and you move on to stress is inherent to living. You see in the Yerkes-Dodson curve which we talked about. What we make of stress determines quality of life. So, everybody has a stress. So, if you have to reach on time, you have to reach on time. But how do you take this anxiety of reaching on time? How do you push yourself? How do you actually plan your mind a day and see how the whole thing goes will determine how actually you are going to deal with it in terms of stress. Cognitive aberrations, we have talked about cognition. Cognitive aberrations, which is called selective abstraction. So, you do not look at the whole picture, you just pick up one thing, think about it out of context and then worry yourself. Minimization and magnification, very small things can sometimes get very magnified in your mind, and your mind can go on feeling like a tizzy and on and on and on, which will disrupt your normal life. Minimization is the reverse of it. These are the type of aberrations. Generalization, now there is something which specifically has happened with you, but it has induced a certain thought process in your head or a emotional state in your head by which you generalize it to everything, to all situations, and that is a seed of phobia. Your mind generalizes in every, like suppose you sometime you would have fallen from a height. It is possible that the brain gets into fear, and every time you see anything which is slightly higher than your thought process not in the sense of your limit of thought, in the terms of concrete height, your mind just suppression of emotions. All of us do it. We know most of the times, actually in fact most of the times we keep suppressing our emotions for others, for society, for being accepted. This need for being accepted is so much that people have to learn to divert their thought process, divert their emotions and divert their whole being and suppressing the thoughts and all. So, what are the sources by which you can improve? Self, work, relationships, societal changes, frustrations, failures. These are the sources by which these challenges and the trouble can arise. It can arise from your own self, the lot of maybe the way one has been brought up, this cognitive style of thinking may not be conducive to a healthy adjustment. You may have a temperamental problem, an emotional problem by which you are not able to adjust. You may have a predilection to any psychiatric illness by which you are not able to adjust, or simply the past experiences of your life have been such and people imitate, people model other people. Yeah, we would have seen people who keep on jumping on everything and reacting. Work can be a considerable source of stress, we all know. So, if your work and your passion and your play is the same, wonderful, but often they are not. Relationships can take you up and bring you down. Societal changes, the larger socio-political foundation of country or times, Indians have experienced it recently with demonetization. It can bring in huge amount of existential crisis. Frustrations obviously build up with all this. Failures, the more they keep happening, the more they keep adding to your and fuzzy thinking. Fuzzy thinking is not the term of that mathematical fuzziness, but because if you try talking to people, most of the people, I do not know whether it is a result of education system, or it is a result of the way brain behaves, or it is a result of the way societies have developed, obviously societies and minds, that lot many people have a problem in problem solving. So, after a certain point of time, small things they will be able to do, but as long as the system is going fine, it is wonderful with them. The moment system challenges them, the mind itself goes into a certain sort of confusion, and they will take a decision which will not be rational and logical, or may not be fulfilling that need, but would be highly tampered with emotion, which would be highly impulsive at times, or maybe colored with their basic mood state of maybe sadness or maybe anger. And then once they take a decision, then their mind obviously makes them behave, and that behavior itself can create problem at work, can create problem at relationship, can create problem in the relationship with the society, increase frustration to a large extent, and obviously the end result is failure, which again increases this cycle. So, this vicious cycle people get into of taking a wrong decision, then jumping, and then creating problems. I will end at this, and we will continue in the next lecture on the same issue. Thank you.